Hi everyone, it's Ian here from IVI Performance Coaching, and today we're going to be talking about the truth behind tracking your workouts. This may seem like a very simple topic, but there's more depth to it than you might imagine. So I'll see you on the other side, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Okay, so I'm responding to a question that was posed on one of the previous videos that I put out by a longtime viewer. Thank you so much for all of your attention and support for my channel. And he basically asked, do you track your workouts? How do you track your workouts? And he said, I've been tracking my workouts for decades at this point, and every time I sort of think I should, maybe I can move away from it or something like that, it's very just a couple days or just a couple hours before I find myself sort of trying to perfect my tracking system, and even though I'm not necessarily trying to make gains or hit PRs or anything like that, I still find myself tracking them. And so how do you do this tracking system when you're approaching exercise in an out-of-the-box sort of way, the way I tend to, where you're incorporating a lot of incidental workouts, you're doing a lot of isometrics, right? Things that are very difficult to track. Okay, so the answer is, unsurprisingly, yes and no. I do track my workouts, and also I don't. A lot of it depends on how suitable the whatever program I'm doing at the given time is for tracking, and what kind of tracking it naturally lends itself to. So, for example, last year I did a dog crap program. For those of you who are not familiar with it, dog crap, that's going to sound like an absurd name. And for those of you who are, it should still sound like an absurd name because it's pretty absurd. But dog crap programming is very much about pursuing that progressive overload. You use a lot of rest pause sets, things like that. And so for that, doing a reps and sets sort of tracking schema was a great solution and worked out very well. Similarly, any sort of program that you're doing around, like a powerlifting program. So if you're trying to compete in powerlifting or something like that, then absolutely you should be tracking, sets, reps, the stuff that people typically do. You should probably also be tracking rest periods, right? Because you can very easily throw off your tracking by taking longer rest periods. So that's something else that should be considered. When I'm doing a free weight, high intensity training approach, so using squats and deadlifts and bench presses and things like that, but not with the intention of lifting as much as I can, so much as really fatiguing the muscle deeply and aggressively in high intensity training, right? In that case, I tend to use what I'm going to call bellwether tracking. So what I do there is I have one lift that I do typically at the beginning of the workout that's my bellwether lift. And I call it that because I track that one for reps and sets. And I do that because I want to see whether I'm getting enough recovery and whether my intensity is sufficient to get my to make myself stronger, right? And so I'll just track my squat, for example, my back squat. And if I'm getting stronger each week, then I know that I'm doing the right things with my training. The rest of the workout I won't track because it's all over the place. I'm mixing up. I'll do a leg day. I'll start with a back squat every time, but then after that, maybe it's a Bulgarian split squat, maybe it's a side lunge, maybe it's a single leg deadlift, maybe it's a Romanian deadlift, maybe hip thrust. It depends. I mix them up, match them. Sometimes it's rest pause, and sometimes it's supersets, and sometimes there's synergy sets in there, and all sorts of different stuff flies. It's all used, and I do that in order to keep things fresh, psychologically fresh, so that I'm really able to hit it with a lot of intensity. But I also do it because I'm mixing up the different movement patterns, and that's going to prevent overuse injuries, which are the most common kinds of injuries, even though you may not recognize that they are, because it's a straw that breaks the camel's back. It feels like an acute injury, but really what it is the accumulation of subacute injuries over a long enough period of time that suddenly it becomes acute, even though you didn't necessarily do anything wrong in the moment when that acute injury materializes. And so I want to avoid that as much as possible. So I mix in a lot of different exercises, and it's pretty much impossible to track that. But I have my bellwether exercise that I'm tracking to know that my recovery is on point and things like that. Okay. When I'm doing a machine-based workout that's high intensity, right, that's where I'll bring out the timer. It doesn't really work as well for free weight stuff because of all the setup, right? Starting a timer and then setting up for a squat and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work as well as if you have a timer and you're sitting on the leg press and you can start the timer and then you can start pushing on the leg press. You don't allow yourself to rest intraset, no locking out, no taking extra breaths. It's constant tension, and you're going until you reach failure, reach momentary muscular failure, and even then you're pushing at for an extra few seconds. Stop, hit the timer, and record your weight and your time. And I did this for quite a while, and it's very effective. And this is actually what I have my clients who use machine-based workouts in the gym. This is the approach that I have them take. And in this case, it's something like, you want to do at least 45 seconds. If you can't do 45 seconds, you need to use less weight. But if you can do more than 90 seconds of constant tension without weight, then you should probably increase the weight so that you're in between those two bookends in terms of time. There are things like the isomax. I have an isomax, and so load and time is a very clear way that you can track there. How much load was I able to stay above, and how long was I able to stay above it, or what was my max load, or all of these things are very useful for tracking. So in that case, I would use load and time. When it comes to synergy strength, the synergy strength programs that I've created, when it comes to synergy sets, very difficult to track these because you're starting off with an isometric, then you're going into dynamic, right? And so because you're getting stronger, presumably, you are able to exert more strength during the initial isometric contraction, which leads to you having less strength to do the dynamic portion. So I've had clients in the past say, like, I feel like I'm getting stronger, but I'm not actually able to do any more push-ups. And so what I'll have them do is what I would call a strength test, where you say, okay, strip out that initial isometric and just do the dynamic portion and see how many you can do. And then they're always like, wow, I did way more than I used to be able to do. Yeah, you've gotten a lot stronger. It just doesn't evidence itself when you're doing the synergy strengths because of the way that it's fit together. And it's another reason why they're so time efficient, because you can be the strongest person in the world, but because you're starting with an isometric maximal contraction or close to maximal contraction, you're never going to spend that much time on the dynamic portion because you're so pre-fatigued. Another way to do this that I've used to great effect is recording your sets. So not just counting your reps when you do your strength test, but recording yourself actually doing the exercise. And because we all have, video recorders in our pockets these days, it's pretty easy to do. You do a strength test, and then, whatever it is, a couple of weeks later, maybe a month later, you record another strength test, and then you just put the videos side to side and say, oh yeah, wow, like I'm able to spend much more time doing push-ups or whatever it is than I was previously, or my reps are going at the same cadence, but I'm able to do more, or I'm going a lot deeper and able to do the same number. You'll see differences. Now, this is also something you don't see many people do, this recording thing, even though it's a very obvious solution to how to track your reps in a supremely effective, very feedback-rich way. And the reason most people don't do it is because it's humbling. It shows you how slow strength gains actually are for people who are more advanced in their training history. I remember, doing like a back squat and recording one, and then a couple weeks later, I was doing like, 3 more reps or something, and I recorded it, and I put the videos side by side, and I basically crapped out at exactly within like a half a second, the first set and the second set, comparing them, right? So I did more reps in the second set, but the time under tension was exactly the same. And so did I really get stronger there? I mean, you could say you did more reps, so, you might have gotten stronger, but it's not as clear as that, I think. So those are solutions as well. When it comes to incidentals, I don't track those, right? And these are things that I do all the time. I push on steering wheels. I throw in an overcoming isometric wall squat. I'll push on a table. I'll just I'm always pushing or pulling or kicking or something like that against immovable objects to practice being strong. But that's the way I think about it. I don't think about that as, I mean, yes, I call them isometric workouts, but it's more like, or incidental workouts, it's more like incidental opportunities to practice being strong. And because it's practice, like if you were practicing your free throw, for basketball, you wouldn't need to log how many you made and how many you didn't. Some days you'd be on, some days you'd be off, right? Some days you'd fit in more, some days you'd fit in less. It's more about building the consistency and making that part of how you engage with the world on a regular basis, right? Okay, so I don't track those at all. Now, another way to do this, to approach this, would be like in a more holistic way, like hypertrophy, right? If you're trying to track hypertrophy, one thing that I typically return to is I basically just weigh myself every day, take my body weight, and I take a waist measurement semi-regularly, like once a week or something like that. And if I'm getting heavier, but my waist measurement isn't noticeably increasing, then I know that I'm building muscle, or more or less. I can be pretty sure it's at least lean tissue. Maybe it's bone density, that kind of thing. So that's a real easy way to track and to be more or less certain that you're making progress, or that you're not. Okay, so what I want to say about all this stuff is that there is no such thing as a perfect tracking system. And we all need to recognize this. The closest thing to a perfect tracking system, I would say, is if you have an isomax, because in that case you are eliminating so many variables. There's no movement, right? It's purely isometric, and it's objective, right? This is how much load you did. This is how much time you did. But very few people have access to an isomax, and so I don't know how helpful that is. All of the other methods that I've listed here are imperfect, and when you're measuring something, right? This is one of the things that Peter Drucker, the great management thinker, said. What gets measured gets managed, and he meant it as in, if you really want to improve something, improve your sales, improve your customer service, you need to start measuring these things, because if they're not measured, you're not actually going to manage them in a way that improves them. And he's right. And the flip side of that coin is that what gets measured tends to get magnified, often to the extent that it occludes the thing that you're actually trying to achieve, right? And so when it comes to something like strength training, and I've made this point in other videos, but it's a really important one. If you're just tracking your sets and reps, okay, getting more reps, getting more weight becomes the goal, rather than getting stronger being the goal over time, right? And so why is that a problem? Everyone talks about progressive overload, and so few people talk about the fact that progressive overload is the result, not the driver. You can progressively overload because you got stronger. It's not progressively overloading that makes you stronger, okay? Yes, you need to continue to challenge yourself, but there are lots of ways to do that, and I have other videos about all this stuff. Okay, so the problem is, because you're tracking your sets, reps, weights, okay, that becomes your goal. And so then you begin subconsciously often to start speeding up your reps, cheating your reps, shortening your range of motion, adding more, what shouldn't be involved muscle groups into the movement. This is where you really increase your risk of injury by doing this, and you're often decreasing the effectiveness of the exercise. And we do this because we don't want to spend 3-4 weeks writing down exactly the same numbers, because strength takes a long time to build, and it's just natural that after a certain point it's going to take you a long time to build that strength. But it doesn't feel good to write down the same numbers every time and to recognize how slow progress actually is. And so we cheat the things, and often subconsciously. And so this magnification of what you're measuring is a real big pitfall that a lot of people fall into. It gets even worse when you really only use one tracking method. So if that's the only tracking method you're using, you are absolutely going to fall into this trap. Over reliance on any tracking system creates an imbalance, it creates a vulnerability. And so this is why I started the video by listing so many different possible tracking methods. Because while there is no perfect system for tracking, there is a more or less perfect strategy for approaching, dealing with the problem of tracking. And that strategy is to find something that will work and then exploit that exploration, explore and find something that will work. And then once you find something that will work, you exploit it, you make use of it, you get the benefit from it. But you need to alternate between those, exploration and exploitation. Okay, don't stick with one thing. So do a program where you track the sets and weight and reps, that kind of stuff, more or less religiously, write everything down, and then maybe switch to a program where you are tracking with a timer, something like that. Or then maybe switch to something where you're, not tracking regularly, but you're doing strength tests, right, to see if you're actually getting stronger the way I described earlier. So by cycling through different tracking methods, you're able to shore up the problems that any one tracking method might present and not allow those problems to evolve into like something that is systemically a systemic vulnerability for yourself that's going to result potentially in injury, potentially in missing lower hanging fruit, potentially in causing you to miss some sort of higher peak that you might have otherwise achieved if you had a more broad view of the landscape. All right, so cycle through them. Cycle through them is what I want to say. All right. Now, I also just want to point out before we finish here that a lot of tracking for a lot of people, I think, serves more of a psychological function than it does serve, to support their physiological adaptation. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think for a lot of people, it's an anxiety mitigation strategy. Writing down things in a book gives them a feeling of control where really it's kind of an illusion. I've had days where I should have been able to lift a certain amount, and for some complete not indiscernible reason I just feel weak that day, just feel super weak. And then maybe the next week, even though I didn't sleep well and I feel like I probably shouldn't be strong at all, I feel super strong that day. There's a lot of chaos that's part of our lives, unpredictability. And I think for a lot of people, writing this stuff down the way that they do is like it's like a comfort. It's a safety blanket, that sort of thing. And so if you feel like this is talking to you, or like maybe I'm hitting on something that's sensitive for you, I would point out that growth requires discomfort. I mean, it's true for training, and it's true for your psychological development as well. If you want to grow as a person, maybe it's time to let go of the safety blanket a little bit, right? Maybe it's time to like force yourself to step away from it and to train without tracking anything for a little while, and to realize that you're still going to get good workouts in. You're not going to lose a whole lot of strength or anything like that. Your muscles aren't going to shrivel away and disappear. Like, you can face the uncertainty of not writing everything down and still survive it. How you do anything is kind of how you do everything. Everything you do is a microcosm for your entire life. You're always practicing who you want to be in other avenues of your life. And so becoming reliant, becoming dependent on anything, whether it's caffeine, whether it's a relationship with a person, whether it's a relationship with your tracking log, right? You can take that as an opportunity for growth, if you're willing to deal with the discomfort. And by making that hard decision, it's a small decision, but it can be a hard decision, you could see those echoes reverberate in a lot of places, in other places in your life. Maybe you make another little hard decision that you've been putting off. Okay, so I know that this is, I'm getting pretty like out there, pretty conceptual here, but honestly, it can be a pretty big leverage point for people to change the way that they train, how they express themselves. Because really, resistance training, when you get down to it, is training to deal with resistance. And resistance is everywhere in life. And so how you engage with your resistance training is again is a lot of, in a lot of ways, a reflective of how you engage with resistance elsewhere in your life. Okay, so just some food for thought there. I hope that this was helpful for some people. If you have any questions, you can drop them down below. Thank you for everyone who supports the channel in all the ways that I'm sure you already know how to do. And if you are interested in any of the programs, you can check the links below. There's the Facebook group as well. Okay, thank you so much. Cheers, everyone. Have a great day.